Everything you think you know about life 500 years ago is probably wrong. Forget the romantic medieval movies. I'm about to show you what an ordinary Tuesday looked like when soap was a luxury, when your house was literally crawling with deadly parasites, and when your neighbor's biggest entertainment was watching public executions. The reality was far stranger and more brutal than any Hollywood film dared to show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another journey through history. Before we dive into 1525, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button or subscribe. It helps more than you know. I'm always curious where you're all listening from. So drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It never ceases to amaze me how we're all connected across the globe through these stories. Now find that comfortable spot, maybe adjust your pillow, and let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. We're about to step back exactly 500 years to 1525, right in the heart of what we call the Renaissance. But forget everything you've seen in movies about this period. We're not visiting the grand palaces or following famous artists tonight. We're experiencing life as it actually was for 95% of the population. The ordinary people whose stories rarely make it into history books. Close your eyes and let me transport you back 5 centuries. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1525. And the first thing that hits you isn't what you see. It's what you smell. The air in your small room carries a mixture of wood smoke, human bodies that haven't been properly washed in weeks, straw that's been slept on for months, and something else. Something organic and slightly rotten that you can't quite identify, but that seems to permeate everything. Your eyes slowly adjust to the dim light filtering through a single small window. There's no glass in that window. Glass is for the wealthy instead. It's covered with oiled cloth or thin sheets of horn that let in some light while keeping out most of the wind and rain. Most of the year, this window stays shuttered because warmth is more important than light. You're lying on what passes for a bed, a wooden frame with ropes stretched across it, topped with a straw mattress that's been compressed from months of use into something roughly the consistency of a thin camping mat. The straw rustles with every movement, and occasionally you feel something small and many-legged scurrying across your skin. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs aren't just common. They're universal. Every person you'll meet today is carrying dozens of these common parasites, and scratching is as natural and constant as breathing. The blanket covering you is made of rough wool that feels scratchy against your skin. It's heavy and warm, but it's also damp from the humidity that seems to fill every space during these cold months. This blanket represents a significant investment for your family. Good wool is expensive, and this one blanket might be the only thing standing between you and freezing to death during the winter nights. As you sit up, your stomach immediately reminds you of a fundamental fact of life in 1525. Hunger is constant. Not the mild hunger you might feel when you skip a meal in modern times, but a deep, gnawing emptiness that affects your ability to think clearly. Most people in 1525 live in a state of chronic malnutrition. You're not starving. Truly starving people don't survive long, but you're always hungry. The room around you is small, perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet, and it serves multiple purposes. This is bedroom, living room, and often workshop all in one. The walls are made of wattle and daub, a framework of wooden strips woven together and covered with a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal dung. When it rains hard, these walls can actually become soft enough to poke your finger through. In one corner of the room stands a wooden chest, probably the most valuable piece of furniture your family owns. This chest contains everything you own beyond the basic necessities, perhaps one change of clothes, any tools specific to your trade, a few eating utensils, and if you're fortunate, a small amount of coin hidden in a secret compartment. The floor beneath your feet is dirt, not wooden planks, not stone, just hard-packed earth that becomes muddy when water seeps through the walls or roof. In winter, this floor is cold enough to numb your feet through your thin leather shoes. In summer, it's dusty and harbors insects. Some families spread rushes or straw on the floor, which helps with warmth, but also provides more hiding places for vermin. You hear sounds from the other room. Your family is already awake. In 1525, privacy is a luxury that doesn't exist for common people. Multiple generations often share the same small space. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, and occasionally boarders all sleep in the same room or in adjacent rooms with thin walls that block neither sound nor smell. As you stand up, your joints protest. At 30 years old, which makes you middle-aged in this era, your body already shows the wear of constant physical labor. Your back aches from sleeping on the thin straw mattress and from yesterday's work. Your hands are permanently stained and calloused from your trade. If you're a man, you might be a carpenter, a blacksmith, a farmer, or work in one of dozens of other physically demanding trades. If you're a woman, your work is no less demanding. Managing a household in 1525 requires skills and strength that would challenge modern athletes. The sounds from the next room are familiar. The scraping of wooden bowls, the rustle of straw, quiet conversations conducted in voices trained not to wake sleeping children. But there's another sound that's harder to identify if you're not used to it. A constant, low-level scratching and rustling that comes from the walls themselves. Your house is alive with creatures. Mice live in the walls and are so common that they're barely noticed unless they get into the food stores. Rats are larger and more problematic, but still a fact of life. In the roof thatch, birds nest and insects breed. Your home isn't just shelter, it's an entire ecosystem. You reach for your clothes, which you left folded at the foot of the bed. In 1525, people don't have pajamas or nightgowns. You sleep in your underclothes, a long linen shirt that serves as both underwear and nightwear. This shirt hasn't been washed in weeks. Washing clothes is an enormous undertaking that happens only a few times a year. And this shirt needs to last. Your outer clothes consist of a woolen tunic, woolen hose, basically thick tights that cover your legs, and leather shoes that you've repaired so many times they're more patch than original leather. If you're fortunate enough to own a hat, it's made of felt or wool and is shaped by weather and wear rather than fashion. Every piece of clothing you own has been mended multiple times. Throwing away clothes because they're worn or damaged isn't an option. Cloth and leather are too valuable. As you dress, you become aware of your body in ways that modern people rarely experience. Your skin itches constantly from insect bites and poor hygiene. Your teeth hurt. Dental problems are universal. And tooth loss is so common that people often look much older than their actual age. Your stomach cramps slightly from hunger and from the poor quality of the food you ate yesterday. And underneath it all is a kind of weariness that comes not from one bad night's sleep, but from years of inadequate nutrition and constant physical stress. But here's what might surprise you most. Despite all of this, you're not miserable. This is simply what life is. You've never known anything different. And more importantly, neither has anyone else around you. The concept of life being easy or comfortable doesn't exist. Survival and occasional small pleasures are what you aim for, and when you achieve them, the satisfaction is profound in a way that people with easy lives rarely experience. You hear your name called from the other room. It's time to start the day. You push aside the rough curtain that separates your sleeping area from the main room, and immediately the sounds and smells of your household envelope you. Your wife, Agnes, is already at work by the small fire that dominates the center of the room. She's feeding small pieces of wood and dried dung into the flames with the careful attention that fire requires in an age when starting a new fire is a complex and time-consuming process. Agnes looks up as you enter, and in her face you can read the same mixture of exhaustion and determination that marks most adults in 1525. She's 25 years old, but looks closer to 40 by modern standards. Her hair, which she keeps covered with a simple linen coif, has already begun to show gray threads. Her hands are red and cracked from constant work with harsh soap and cold water. But her eyes are bright and alert. Intelligence and wit weren't rare in the past. Just education. Good morning, she says, though good is relative. She's been awake since before dawn, starting the fire, checking on the children, and beginning the day's work. In 1525, there are no lazy mornings. No sleeping in, no breakfast in bed. Every day begins with immediate survival tasks. Your 3 children are already awake, Tom. Your eldest, at 8 years old, is helping his mother with the fire. In modern terms, he'd still be in elementary school, but in 1525, he's already learning the skills he'll need to survive as an adult. He handles sharp tools, works with fire, and takes responsibility for tasks that would terrify modern parents. Childhood as we understand it, a time of play and protection from adult responsibilities, simply doesn't exist. Mary, who is 6, sits in the corner carefully mending a tear in a piece of cloth. Her fingers are small and nimble, perfect for the detailed work that cloth repair requires. She's learning skills that will be essential to her survival as an adult woman. By the time she's 12, she'll be expected to manage many household tasks with little supervision. Little John, barely 3 years old, plays with simple toys carved from wood scraps. A small horse, a spinning top, a ball made from cloth stuffed with straw. These toys were made by family members during the long winter evenings when other work was finished. There are no stores selling toys, no mass-produced playthings. Everything is made by hand, usually by family members. But even little John isn't simply playing. He's learning to stay away from the fire, to be quiet when adults are working, to amuse himself without constant attention. In an era when children die easily from disease, accident, or simple neglect, those who survive learn early to be careful, observant, and self-sufficient. The main room of your house serves multiple functions. The central fire provides heat, light, and cooking capability. Around it, the family gathers for meals, work, and warmth. There's no dining table. People eat sitting on simple wooden stools or standing, holding their food in wooden bowls. There's no living room furniture as we'd recognize it. A few wooden chests serve as both storage and seating. The family's few possessions hang from wooden pegs driven into the walls or sit on simple wooden shelves. Agnes hands you a wooden bowl containing your breakfast. The bowl itself is roughly carved and shows the marks of years of use. The food inside is porridge made from barley and oats, thickened with whatever vegetables could be stored through the winter. It's not particularly appetizing by modern standards, bland, somewhat lumpy, and containing bits of chaff and other debris that couldn't be completely removed from the grain. But it's filling and provides the energy you'll need for the day's work. You eat with a wooden spoon, one of the few eating utensils your family owns. Forks haven't been invented yet, and knives are tools rather than tableware. Most food is eaten with spoons or fingers. The porridge is warm, which is a luxury in itself. Maintaining a fire requires constant attention and fuel. So many families eat cold food rather than spend the resources needed for cooking. As you eat, Agnes shares the morning's news and concerns. The baby goat that was sick yesterday seems better today. The roof is leaking in 2 new places and will need attention before the next heavy rain. The grain stores are running lower than she'd like. Considering it's still early spring and the next harvest is months away. Tom needs new shoes. His current pair has holes that let in water and cold. Mary has been coughing at night. Which could be nothing, or could be the beginning of the lung fever that killed 3 children in the village last winter. These aren't casual observations. They're survival calculations. Every decision your family makes must consider the balance between immediate needs and long-term consequences. Spending money on Tom's shoes means less money available for grain if the current stores run out. Taking time to repair the roof means less time available for other essential tasks. Agnes's apparent cough could be the beginning of an illness that could kill her, orphan the children, and destroy the family's economic stability. As the family eats together, you're reminded of how different family dynamics were 500 years ago. Children are expected to contribute economically from an early age, but they're also cherished in ways that might surprise modern people. In an era when child mortality is high, every surviving child represents hope for the family's future. Parents invest enormous effort in teaching their children skills, but they also shower them with affection and attention whenever the demands of survival allow. The relationship between husband and wife is also different from modern expectations. Agnes isn't subservient or powerless. Managing a 1525 household requires skills, intelligence, and decision-making ability that would challenge modern executives. She controls significant resources, makes daily decisions that affect the family's survival, and possesses knowledge about food preservation, textile production, herbal medicine, and childcare that makes her indispensable. The marriage is a partnership, though one defined by very different roles than modern marriages. After breakfast, the family's workday begins in earnest. This isn't a matter of 1 or 2 people leaving for jobs while others remain home. In 1525, survival requires every family member to work almost constantly. There's no concept of weekends, very few holidays, and even less leisure time. Work begins at dawn and continues until darkness makes it impossible to continue. But before the workday can begin properly, there are morning tasks that must be completed. The fire must be banked and fed to ensure it doesn't die during the day. The animals, a few chickens, perhaps a goat, maybe a pig, must be fed and checked for illness or injury. The night's chamber pot must be emptied. Water must be drawn from the well or stream. Any food that requires cooking for the midday meal must be prepared and set to cook slowly over the fire. These tasks are divided among family members according to age and gender, but the divisions aren't as rigid as many people assume. Children of both genders learn basic cooking, cleaning, and animal care. Women often participate in traditionally male trades when family circumstances require it. Men take on household tasks when their wives are pregnant, ill, or overwhelmed with other responsibilities. As the morning routine continues, you become aware of the sounds from outside your house. Other families are beginning their days with similar routines. You hear the sound of axes splitting wood, animals being let out of their overnight shelters, children's voices, and the general bustle of a community waking up. But you also hear other sounds that would be unfamiliar to modern ears: the constant creaking and settling of wooden buildings, the sound of wind through thatch roofs, and occasionally, sounds that remind you how precarious life is in this era. Someone is coughing violently in a nearby house, the kind of deep, painful coughing that suggests serious lung problems. An argument breaks out between neighbors over property boundaries or borrowed tools. A woman's voice rises in grief or distress. These sounds are part of the daily soundtrack of life in 1525. Reminders that disease, conflict, and loss are never far away. But there are pleasant sounds too. Someone is singing while they work. Children are laughing at their play. The rhythmic sounds of various crafts, hammering, sawing, weaving, create a kind of music that speaks of productivity and community cooperation. People call greetings to each other as they begin their daily rounds. As your family finishes the morning meal and prepares to begin the day's work, you're struck by something that might not be immediately obvious to modern observers. Despite the hardships, despite the constant threat of disease and want, despite the lack of what we'd consider basic comforts, there's a sense of purpose and community that many modern people might envy. Everyone knows their role. Everyone contributes according to their ability. Everyone understands that their survival depends on the cooperation and success of their family and community. There's no existential wondering about the meaning of life or one's place in the world. The meaning is clear. Survive, support your family, contribute to your community, and find what happiness you can in small pleasures and human connections. This doesn't mean life is easy or that people don't suffer. They suffer constantly, in ways that would overwhelm most modern people. But they also possess a kind of resilience and adaptability that comes from facing real challenges with real consequences every single day. As the family prepares to leave the house for the day's work, Agnes hands you a small cloth bundle containing the midday meal: bread, cheese, and perhaps a small piece of dried meat. This meal represents a significant portion of the family's daily food resources. But going without food during the long working day isn't an option. Physical labor requires fuel, and without adequate food, work performance suffers, which could mean the difference between family prosperity and family disaster. The morning routine is complete. It's time to leave the house and begin the day's real work. As you step outside your house, the first thing that strikes you is how alive the world feels. Not alive in the modern sense of bustling traffic and electronic sounds, but alive with the immediate presence of nature and the rhythms of human labor that follow natural cycles rather than artificial schedules. The village street beneath your feet isn't paved. It's hard-packed dirt that turns to mud when it rains and dust when it's dry. Along the edges, drainage ditches carry away rainwater and household waste, creating a constant smell that's part earth, part decay, and part human habitation. You step carefully around the worst of the puddles and debris, but your shoes will be caked with mud by day's end regardless of how careful you are. The houses lining the street are similar to yours, small, built primarily of wood and daub, with thatched roofs that provide homes for countless birds and insects. Smoke rises from chimney holes in every roof, creating a haze that hangs over the village and gives the air a perpetual taste of wood fire. Some houses are in better repair than others, but none would meet modern standards for weatherproofing or cleanliness. As you walk toward your workplace, you pass neighbors beginning their own daily routines. The baker has been at work since before dawn, and the smell of bread drifts from his shop, a luxury smell. Since most families bake their own bread only occasionally and usually eat porridge or gruels made from less expensive grains, the blacksmith's fire is already glowing hot, and you can hear the rhythmic sound of his hammer against iron. The carpenter is selecting wood for the day's projects, examining each piece carefully since waste isn't an option when materials are expensive and replacement is difficult. Your own work is as a weaver, a trade that requires both strength and delicate skill. The workshop where you work is owned by Master William, a man who has achieved a level of prosperity that puts him solidly in the emerging middle class of 1525. He owns the looms, buys the raw materials, and sells the finished cloth to merchants who travel between villages and cities. The workshop is a long, narrow building with windows placed to catch the maximum amount of natural light. Good light is essential for the detailed work of weaving. And since artificial light is expensive and potentially dangerous around the flammable materials of the textile trade, most work must be done during daylight hours. The windows are larger than those in most houses, but they're still covered with oiled cloth rather than glass. So the light they provide is diffused and somewhat dim by modern standards. Inside the workshop, 4 large looms dominate the space. These aren't the simple hand looms you might see in a museum demonstration. They're complex machines made entirely of wood and rope, requiring skill to operate and constant maintenance to keep in working order. Each loom represents a significant investment for Master William, and they're treated with the respect due to valuable and essential tools. 3 other men work in the shop alongside you. Thomas is older, perhaps 45, and has been weaving for more than 20 years. His hands move across the loom with the fluid precision that comes from decades of practice, and his output far exceeds that of the younger workers. But his eyes are starting to fail. The strain of detailed work in poor light takes its toll, and everyone in the shop knows that his most productive years are behind him. John is closer to your age, a solid craftsman who produces good work at a steady pace. He has his own family to support and is saving money with the hope of eventually buying his own loom and establishing his own small business. This dream drives him to work extra hours when materials are available and to maintain his equipment with meticulous care. Peter is barely 16, recently arrived from a farming village to learn the weaving trade. He's still clumsy with the complex motions required to operate the loom efficiently, and his cloth sometimes shows irregularities that affect its market value. But he's eager to learn and works hard to improve, understanding that his future depends on mastering this trade. The relationship between these men isn't exactly friendship as we'd understand it today, but it's deeper than mere workplace cooperation. They depend on each other not just for productivity, but for knowledge sharing, mutual assistance, and even survival. When one man becomes ill, the others must pick up his workload. When someone develops a new technique or discovers a more efficient way to complete a task, he shares this knowledge because the success of the workshop benefits everyone. Master William moves through the shop regularly, checking the quality of the work, adjusting orders based on what merchants are requesting, and making decisions about which types of cloth to produce. He's not an absentee owner. He knows every aspect of the business and often works alongside his employees when urgent orders must be completed. His prosperity depends entirely on the skill and productivity of his workers, so he has strong incentives to maintain good working relationships and to ensure that his people have the tools and materials they need. The work itself is physically demanding. Operating a loom requires strength to maintain tension on the threads, coordination to manage the complex sequence of motions, and endurance to maintain productivity throughout the long working day. Your hands constantly manipulate threads, shuttles, and loom parts, developing calluses and permanent stains from the dyes used to color the wool. Your back aches from bending over the loom, and your eyes strain from the detailed work in inconsistent light. But there's also satisfaction in the work that many modern jobs don't provide. You can see the immediate results of your labor as plain wool threads become patterned cloth. You know that the cloth you're creating will become clothing that keeps people warm, bedding that provides comfort, or trade goods that support the local economy. The connection between your work and its purpose is immediate and obvious. The materials you work with, wool, linen, and occasionally silk, are expensive and must be handled carefully. Waste is not just inefficient, it's economically devastating. A mistake that ruins a day's work could mean the difference between profit and loss for the entire workshop. This creates a level of attention and care that extends to every aspect of the work. The wool arrives at the workshop in various stages of preparation. Some comes directly from local sheep farmers and must be cleaned, carded and spun into thread before it can be woven. This preparatory work is often done by women and children working in their homes, a part of the textile economy that allows families to earn additional income during seasons when other work is scarce. Other wool arrives already spun into thread, purchased from specialized spinners who have developed exceptional skill in creating threads of consistent thickness and strength. The quality of the thread determines the quality of the finished cloth. So Master William pays premium prices for the best materials when producing cloth intended for wealthy customers. The actual weaving process requires constant attention. Each row of the pattern must be completed correctly. The tension must be maintained consistently, and any breaks in the thread must be repaired immediately. The rhythmic sound of the looms creates a kind of music that experienced weavers can read like a language. Changes in the sound indicate problems that need attention. During the morning work, conversation flows freely among the workers. Peter asks questions about technique and receives patient instruction from Thomas and John. Someone shares news from their neighborhood, a birth, a death, news from traveling merchants about events in distant villages. These conversations serve multiple purposes. They make the long hours of work pass more pleasantly. They build the social connections that are essential for survival in this era, and they spread information that helps the community function effectively. Around midday, work stops for the main meal. This isn't a brief lunch break. It's a significant interruption that lasts for an hour or more. The workers eat the food they brought from home, supplemented sometimes by bread or cheese that Master William provides when business is particularly good. The conversation during this meal often turns to more serious topics: politics, religion, economic conditions, or personal concerns. In 1525, these topics aren't separate from daily life the way they often are in modern times. Political decisions directly affect trade regulations, taxation, and the availability of materials. Religious conflicts can disrupt commerce and create refugees who strain local resources. Economic conditions in distant regions can affect demand for locally produced goods. Personal concerns, illness, family problems, housing issues, affect work performance and require community support to resolve. After the meal, work resumes and continues until darkness makes detailed work impossible. There's no electric lighting, and candles or oil lamps are too expensive and dangerous for routine use in a workshop filled with flammable materials. The length of the working day varies dramatically with the seasons. Long summer days allow for extended productivity, while short winter days limit the hours available for work. But even when the formal workday ends, the economic activity doesn't stop. Workers often take materials home to continue working by firelight. Wives and children contribute to the household economy by doing preparatory work for the next day's weaving. Equipment must be maintained and repaired. New materials must be prepared for use. The economic relationships that govern this work are complex and often based more on personal trust than formal contracts. Master William extends credit to customers he knows and trusts. Workers sometimes receive advance payments when their families face emergencies. Suppliers often deliver materials before payment, trusting that Master William's reputation guarantees eventual compensation. This system works because everyone in the community knows everyone else. Reputation is more valuable than money, because reputation determines whether people will do business with you, loan you money when you need it, help you when you're in trouble, or trust you with their own economic welfare. A reputation for dishonesty, unreliability, or poor work quality can destroy a person's economic prospects in ways that would be difficult to recover from. As the afternoon wears on and the available light begins to fade, the pace of work intensifies. Everyone wants to complete as much as possible before darkness forces them to stop. The sound of the looms becomes more urgent, and conversation decreases as workers focus entirely on their tasks. But even as they work, everyone is aware of the broader community around them. Sounds from the street indicate the progress of other people's workdays. The blacksmith's hammer continues its rhythm. Carts pass by carrying goods to and from the market. Children's voices indicate that the young ones are completing their own daily tasks. Church bells mark the passage of time and call people to various community obligations. The integration of work life with community life is complete in a way that modern people rarely experience. Work isn't something you travel to and return from. It's woven into the fabric of daily life, family relationships, and community obligations. Success at work means survival for your family and prosperity for your community. Failure at work means hunger, cold, and social isolation. As the light finally fades enough to make detailed work impossible, the workers begin the process of securing their materials and equipment for the night. Threads must be carefully arranged to prevent tangling. Tools must be cleaned and stored safely. Unfinished work must be protected from dust, insects, and dampness. This end-of-day routine is as important as the work itself because the tools and materials represent most of the workshop's value. Damage to equipment could shut down production for days or weeks while repairs are made. Damage to materials could destroy the profit margin on entire orders. In an economy where there's no insurance and very little financial reserve, preventing loss is as important as generating profit. As you prepare to leave the workshop and return home, you reflect on the day's accomplishments. Several yards of good cloth have been completed and will soon be sold to merchants who will carry it to distant markets. Your skill as a weaver has improved slightly through practice and observation. You've earned the money that will feed your family and maintain your household. And you've strengthened the relationships with fellow workers and community members that provide the social safety net that everyone depends on for survival. The workday is over, but the day itself is far from finished. As you walk home through the village streets in the gathering dusk, the community around you continues to bustle with activity. The end of the formal workday doesn't mean the end of productivity. It simply shifts to different types of tasks and different social rhythms. In front of many houses, women sit on simple wooden stools, spinning thread by the light of the doorway. Spinning is work that can continue after the light becomes too dim for weaving or other detailed crafts. And it's essential work, since thread is always needed for the textile production that forms the backbone of the local economy. The spinning wheels make a gentle humming sound as they turn, and the women's hands move with the automatic precision that comes from thousands of hours of practice. Children run between the houses, playing games that serve dual purposes, entertainment and education. They play with hoops and sticks, developing the coordination they'll need for adult work. They engage in mock battles with wooden swords, learning the basics of combat that might someday save their lives. They race and jump and climb, developing the physical strength and endurance that adult life demands. But even children's play has serious undertones in 1525. The games often mimic adult activities. Girls play house with dolls made from scraps of cloth, practicing the household management skills they'll need as wives and mothers. Boys practice carpentry with toy tools. Learning to work with wood and metal, children of both genders play market, practicing the negotiation and calculation skills that economic survival requires. Groups of men gather outside the tavern, discussing the day's events and sharing information about economic opportunities, political developments, and community concerns. These gatherings aren't just social, they're essential networks for sharing knowledge, coordinating community projects, and building the relationships that make economic cooperation possible. The tavern itself is one of the most important institutions in the village. It's not just a place to drink ale, it's the community's meeting hall, information exchange, and social center. Travelers stop here to share news from other regions. Local residents gather here to discuss important community decisions. Business deals are negotiated and partnerships formed over shared meals and drinks. The tavern keeper, Master Robert, is one of the most influential people in the village. Though his influence comes from social position rather than formal authority, he hears everyone's news, knows everyone's business, and often serves as an informal mediator when disputes arise. His establishment provides one of the few spaces where men from different trades and social levels can gather on relatively equal terms. The social structure of the village is complex and based on multiple factors. Wealth is important, but so are family history, craft skill, personal reputation, and community contribution. Master William, your employer, ranks high in the social hierarchy because he owns substantial property and employs other men, but he still shows respect to Thomas the Weaver, whose skill and experience make him valuable to the community despite his limited wealth. The priest holds a special position that combines spiritual authority with practical influence. Father Michael not only conducts religious services, but also serves as one of the few educated people in the village. He can read and write, which makes him essential for legal documents, letters, and record-keeping. He also possesses medical knowledge, since the church has long been involved in caring for the sick and injured. Women's social positions are more complex than many modern people assume. While they have fewer formal rights than men, their practical influence is substantial. A woman who manages her household skillfully, raises healthy children, and contributes significantly to the family's economic prosperity earns respect and influence that extends well beyond her immediate family. Agnes, your wife, is known throughout the village for her skill in herbal medicine and her ability to assist with difficult births. When people are sick or injured, they often seek her advice before consulting anyone else. This knowledge and skill give her a social position that's independent of your own status as her husband. Older women often wield considerable influence because they've accumulated decades of knowledge about everything from childcare to food preservation to conflict resolution. In a society where information is transmitted orally and experience is the primary teacher, elderly people who remain mentally sharp are valuable resources for the entire community. The village also includes people whose social positions are marginal or problematic. There's old Sarah, who lives alone in a tiny hut at the edge of the village and survives through the charity of neighbors and occasional work as a laundress. Her situation is precarious, without family to support her. She depends entirely on community goodwill, which can be withdrawn if she's perceived as ungrateful or troublesome. There's also young Martin, whose family died of disease several years ago and who has never quite recovered from the loss. He works when work is available, but drinks too much and sometimes causes trouble. The community tolerates him partly out of sympathy and partly because his situation reminds everyone how quickly their own circumstances could change. The blacksmith, Master John, occupies a unique position because his skills are essential but also somewhat mysterious to most villagers. Working with iron and fire requires knowledge that seems almost magical to people who don't understand metallurgy. This gives him both high status and slight social isolation. He's respected and well paid, but also viewed with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. Social interactions are governed by complex rules that everyone understands but that are rarely explicitly stated. Age, gender, family connections, economic status, and personal history all influence how people speak to each other. Where they sit in church, who speaks first in group discussions, and dozens of other daily interactions. These social rules aren't arbitrary. They serve important functions in maintaining community stability. In a world without police, courts, or formal government services, social pressure is the primary mechanism for maintaining order and resolving conflicts. People who violate social norms face isolation, reduced economic opportunities, and loss of the community support that everyone needs for survival. But the social system also provides support and security that modern people might envy. Everyone has a defined place and role. Everyone knows what's expected of them and what they can expect from others. The community has strong incentives to care for its members because everyone's survival depends on community cooperation. As you continue your walk home, you pass the village church, where evening prayers are being conducted. The church building is by far the largest and most impressive structure in the village, its stone walls and wooden spire dominating the skyline. This physical prominence reflects the church's central role in community life. Religion in 1525 isn't a private matter. It's a community obligation and a unifying force. Everyone attends services regularly, not just because they believe in the teachings, but because church attendance is how the community gathers, shares information, and maintains social bonds. Missing church without a very good reason marks you as antisocial and potentially dangerous to community stability. The church calendar structures the entire rhythm of village life. Feast days provide breaks from work and opportunities for celebration. Fast days require changes in diet and behavior that affect everyone. Religious holidays determine when markets are held, when marriages can be performed, and when important community decisions can be made. Father Michael's sermon tonight focuses on the virtue of accepting one's place in God's plan, a message that reinforces the social hierarchy while also providing comfort to people whose lives are often difficult and uncertain. The idea that suffering has spiritual value and that humble work is blessed by God helps people find meaning in circumstances that might otherwise seem hopeless. But religion also provides practical benefits. The church maintains the only substantial library in the region, preserving not just religious texts, but also practical knowledge about agriculture, medicine, and law. The church's feast days provide the only reliable charity for the truly destitute. Church law governs marriage, inheritance, and many business relationships, providing stability in a world where secular legal systems are weak or non-existent. As the evening prayers conclude and people begin to disperse to their homes, you observe the complex social dance that governs these interactions. People don't just leave randomly. There's a careful order based on social precedents. Master William and other property owners leave first, followed by skilled craftsmen, then laborers, and finally the marginal members of the community. But this hierarchy isn't rigidly oppressive. Master William stops to speak with several workers, asking about their families and offering advice about business matters. The priest spends time with the poorest members of the community, ensuring that their basic needs are being met. Social position brings obligations as well as privileges. Women gather in small groups to share news and coordinate the informal networks that handle many community functions. They discuss who needs help with childcare, which families are running short of food, who requires assistance with household tasks due to illness or pregnancy. These conversations are essential community business. Even though they happen outside formal political structures, children who attended the service cluster around adults, listening to conversations and learning the social skills they'll need as adults. They're not excluded from community life. They're gradually being inducted into it, learning through observation and participation how the complex web of relationships that holds the community together actually functions. As you finally reach your own home, you reflect on the social complexity you've observed during the simple walk from workplace to house. Every interaction has been governed by understood rules, but those rules also create a sense of security and belonging that many modern people lack. Everyone knows where they fit, what's expected of them, and what they can expect from others. The interior of your house feels different in the evening than it did in the morning. The fire that Agnes has maintained throughout the day has warmed the main room, creating a pocket of comfort that contrasts sharply with the cold air outside. The small windows show only darkness now, making the house feel like a safe island in a potentially dangerous world. Agnes has been busy during your absence, and the evidence of her work fills the room. Fresh bread sits cooling on a wooden board, a special treat that indicates either a celebration or the availability of particularly good flour. A pot of pottage simmers over the fire, filling the air with the smell of vegetables, grains, and, if the family has been particularly fortunate, a small amount of meat. But Agnes's day has been far more complex than simply preparing food. She's also cleaned and repaired clothing, tended the small garden behind the house, managed the household's few animals, processed food for long-term storage, and handled dozens of other tasks that keep the household functioning. Her work requires as much skill and knowledge as your weaving, but it's often invisible because it happens within the domestic sphere. The children's activities during the day have also been productive rather than simply recreational. Tom has spent time learning to carve wood under the guidance of a neighbor, developing skills that might eventually allow him to work as a carpenter or cooper. Mary has helped with spinning and has begun learning the basics of weaving on a small practice loom. Even little John has contributed by gathering kindling for the fire and helping to feed the chickens. The evening meal is the day's main social event for the family. Everyone gathers around the fire, sitting on simple wooden stools or on the floor, sharing food from the common pot and catching up on the day's events. The conversation flows naturally between practical concerns: what work was accomplished, what problems were encountered, what plans need to be made for tomorrow, and more personal topics. Agnes describes her conversation with the neighbor women, sharing news about other families in the village. A baby has been born to the miller's wife, but the birth was difficult, and both mother and child remain weak. The carpenter's oldest son has decided to travel to the nearest city to seek work there, a risky decision that could lead to prosperity or disaster. The widow Thompson has received an offer of marriage from a widower in the next village, creating difficult decisions about property, children, and loyalty to her deceased husband's memory. You share news from the workshop and from your observations during the walk home. Master William has received a large order from a merchant in the regional capital, which will mean steady work for several weeks, but also pressure to maintain high-quality standards. Thomas the Weaver has been suffering from increasingly severe problems with his eyes, raising concerns about his ability to continue working. The priest mentioned during evening prayers that tax collectors are expected to arrive within the next few weeks, a development that requires careful financial planning. The children contribute their own observations and experiences, Tom describes a technique he learned for joining pieces of wood without using expensive metal nails. Mary shares her excitement about mastering a particularly difficult stitch in her embroidery practice. John recounts his adventures chasing chickens and his discovery of where the old hen has been hiding her eggs. These conversations serve multiple purposes beyond simple communication. They reinforce family bonds and create shared narratives that help the family function as a cohesive unit. They also serve educational functions, as children learn about adult concerns and responsibilities through listening to their parents' discussions, and they provide emotional support, allowing family members to share their fears, hopes, and frustrations in a safe environment. The food itself, while simple by modern standards, represents considerable skill and resource management. The pottage combines whatever vegetables could be preserved from the previous harvest with grains that have been carefully stored to last through the winter and spring. The bread represents a significant investment in flour, yeast, and fuel for the oven. Even small additions like herbs for flavoring demonstrate Agnes's knowledge of food preparation and her ability to make simple ingredients more palatable. Water for drinking comes from a well shared with several neighboring families. This water isn't always clean by modern standards, and waterborne illnesses are common, but it's the best available option. Many families supplement their water intake with weak ale, which is often safer to drink than water because the brewing process kills many harmful microorganisms. After the meal, the family's evening activities begin. These activities serve both practical and social functions, allowing work to continue while also providing opportunities for education, entertainment, and bonding. Agnes works on mending clothes by firelight, a task that requires careful attention since cloth is too valuable to waste. She examines each garment for weak spots, small tears, or areas where wear is beginning to show, making repairs before minor problems become major ones. This work also allows her to teach Mary the skills she'll need to maintain her own family's clothing when she's older. You work on carving wooden tools and household implements, a skill that saves money and provides useful items for the family. Tonight you're working on a new wooden spoon to replace one that cracked during the day's use. The work is detailed and requires good light, but it's also relaxing after the day's more demanding labor at the loom. Tom practices writing on a wooden tablet covered with wax, learning the letters that Father Michael has been teaching him during Sunday lessons. Literacy is rare and valuable in 1525, and the ability to read and write could open economic opportunities that would otherwise be unavailable. But the lessons are challenging, and progress is slow when most of his time must be devoted to learning practical skills. Mary works on embroidery, creating decorative elements for the family's clothing and household textiles. This work serves both practical and artistic purposes. Well-made embroidery increases the value of cloth goods and demonstrates the skill of the maker, potentially leading to commissioned work that could supplement the family's income. Little John plays quietly with his simple toys, but he's also listening to the adult conversations and absorbing information about how families work, how decisions are made, and how problems are solved. In an era when formal education is rare, most learning happens through observation and participation in family and community life. The fire provides the only light for these activities, creating a warm circle of productivity surrounded by darkness. The flickering flames make detailed work challenging, but they also create an atmosphere of intimacy and security that brings the family together in ways that modern electric lighting rarely matches. Conversation continues throughout these evening activities, but it takes on different characteristics than the dinner conversation. With hands busy and attention partly focused on work, people speak more thoughtfully and reflectively. Stories are told, family histories, folk tales, religious narratives, and accounts of remarkable events that have become part of the community's shared memory. Agnes tells the story of how her grandmother survived a particularly harsh winter by eating bark and roots when all other food ran out. This story serves multiple purposes. It entertains the children, it preserves family history, and it reminds everyone of survival techniques that might someday be necessary again. You share a story about Master William's early days as a weaver, when he was even poorer than his current employees and had to sleep in the workshop because he couldn't afford separate housing. This story provides hope that hard work and skill can lead to prosperity, while also explaining some of Master William's current attitudes and policies. Tom contributes a story he heard from other children about a man in a neighboring village who claimed to have seen a ghost in the old church ruins. This story allows the family to discuss beliefs about death, the afterlife, and supernatural phenomena, topics that are important in a worldview where the boundary between natural and supernatural is much more fluid than in modern thinking. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're how knowledge, values, and cultural understanding are transmitted from generation to generation. In a largely illiterate society, oral tradition carries the accumulated wisdom of the community, preserving everything from practical survival techniques to moral principles to historical awareness. As the evening progresses, the rhythm of activities gradually slows. The fire is banked for the night, reducing it to glowing coals that will provide some warmth through the dark hours, but won't consume too much fuel. Tools are cleaned and put away. Work materials are stored safely to prevent damage from dampness or insects. The process of preparing for sleep is more complex than in modern times. Chamber pots must be made available for nighttime needs. Since venturing outside in the dark is both uncomfortable and potentially dangerous, additional blankets are distributed based on each person's needs and the expected coldness of the night. The fire is arranged so that it will provide maximum heat with minimum risk of spreading to flammable materials. Personal hygiene before sleep is minimal by modern standards. Faces and hands might be washed with cold water, and teeth might be cleaned with rough cloth or wooden picks. But full-body washing is a weekly or monthly activity rather than a daily routine. Hair is combed to remove debris and braided or covered to keep it clean during sleep. Clothing for sleep consists of the same linen undergarments worn during the day. Pajamas or nightgowns are luxury items that most families can't afford. During winter, people often sleep fully clothed to stay warm, removing only their outer shoes and perhaps their heaviest outer garments. The family's sleeping arrangements reflect both practical needs and social customs. Parents sleep in the main bed, while children share smaller beds or sleep on straw mats on the floor. Privacy is minimal, and family members become accustomed to the sounds and movements of others during the night. As the family settles down for sleep, the house gradually becomes quiet. The sounds from outside also diminish as other families complete their own evening routines. But the night isn't completely silent. Animals move in their shelters. Wind whistles through gaps in the walls and roof, and the fire continues to crackle softly as it burns down to coals. Before sleep comes, there's often a period of quiet conversation or prayer. Agnes might offer a simple blessing for the family's safety during the night and gratitude for the day's small successes. The children might ask questions about the next day's activities or share their thoughts about the day's events. This transition to sleep is gradual and natural, following the rhythm of darkness rather than the artificial schedule that electric lighting makes possible. People become drowsy as the fire dims and the temperature drops, and sleep comes easily after a day of physical labor and mental engagement. But even in sleep, the family remains alert to potential dangers. Unusual sounds might wake parents who need to check on children. Animals or the security of the house. Fire is a constant worry, and the smell of smoke or the sound of unusual crackling could indicate a dangerous situation. Illness can develop quickly, especially in children, requiring immediate attention even during the night hours. The night also brings different kinds of awareness. In the darkness and quiet, people become more conscious of their dependence on each other and on the fragile structures that provide safety and comfort. The sounds of wind and weather remind everyone of the natural forces that could threaten their survival. The warmth of the family bed contrasts with the cold air beyond the blankets, emphasizing both vulnerability and security. As sleep finally takes hold, consciousness fades into dreams that often reflect the concerns and experiences of daily life. People dream of work, of family, of food, of the seasonal cycles that govern agricultural life, and of the social relationships that provide both support and stress. Tomorrow will bring another day of similar challenges and similar small victories. The cycle of work, community interaction, and family life will repeat with variations based on season, weather, health, and economic circumstances. But tonight, in the warmth of the fire and the security of family, life feels manageable and meaningful in ways that transcend the material hardships that define so much of existence in 1525. As winter gradually gives way to spring in 1525, the rhythms of life begin to shift in ways that modern people, Insulated from natural cycles by artificial lighting and climate control, rarely experience, the lengthening days mean more hours available for productive work. But they also bring new challenges and opportunities that will determine whether your family prospers or merely survives through the coming year. The first signs of spring are subtle but critically important. Agnes notices that the chickens are beginning to lay more eggs as daylight increases, providing a welcome source of protein after the lean winter months. The small garden plot behind your house shows the first green shoots of early vegetables planted in the fall, onions, leeks, and herbs that survived the winter cold and now promise fresh food to supplement the stored grains and preserved foods that have sustained your family through the dark months. But spring also brings dangers that winter's cold kept at bay. The warming weather makes standing water more hospitable to the organisms that cause dysentery and other waterborne diseases. The increased contact between people as outdoor work resumes spreads respiratory illnesses that were contained during the winter months when families stayed mostly indoors. And the greater mobility that better weather allows brings news of wars, political upheavals, and economic disruptions in distant regions that could affect local prosperity. Your work at the weaving shop changes with the seasons as well. Master William has been planning the year's production during the winter months, negotiating with suppliers for the raw materials he'll need, and with merchants for the orders that will keep the workshop busy. Spring brings the arrival of new wool from sheep that were sheared as soon as the weather became warm enough for them to survive without their full winter coats. This new wool requires different handling than the wool you worked with during the winter. It's often dirtier, containing more lanolin and debris that must be removed before spinning, but it's also fresher and easier to work with, producing cloth with better texture and color retention. The increased daylight also allows for longer working hours and more detailed work, since the natural light streaming through the workshop windows is better than anything artificial lighting can provide. The seasonal shift also brings changes in what types of cloth are in demand. Heavy winter fabrics give way to lighter materials suitable for warmer weather. Bright colors become more popular as people emerge from the drab browns and grays that dominate winter clothing. And there's increased demand for cloth that will be made into new garments to replace items that wore out during the winter's hard use. For Agnes, spring means a dramatic increase in the variety and intensity of her work. The garden requires daily attention as she plants the vegetables that will feed the family through the coming year. Each type of plant has its own requirements for soil preparation. Planting time and care and mistakes made now will mean hunger later. She's also responsible for processing the increased egg production from the chickens, preserving eggs in various ways that will allow them to be eaten during seasons when the hens aren't laying. Some eggs are pickled in vinegar, others are packed in salt, and still others are used immediately in special foods that celebrate the return of abundance. The house itself requires spring maintenance after the harsh winter weather. Agnes inspects every surface for damage from cold, moisture, and the inevitable wear that comes from a family living in close quarters during the months when outdoor work is impossible. Small repairs made now prevent major problems later, but they also require time and materials that must be balanced against other pressing needs. For the children, spring brings both new freedoms and new responsibilities. Tom can now spend more time outdoors, helping with garden work and learning agricultural skills that complement his training in carpentry. But he's also old enough to take on more demanding tasks, and the longer days mean longer working hours that leave less time for play. Mary's work also intensifies as spring cleaning begins in earnest. Every piece of cloth in the house must be inspected, cleaned and repaired after the winter's heavy use. Bedding must be aired and freshened. Clothing must be mended and altered as children grow and adults' bodies change from the winter's restricted diet and limited exercise. Little John delights in the return of outdoor play, but he's also learning to be useful in small ways, gathering kindling, feeding chickens, and helping with simple tasks that free adults for more complex work. His education continues through observation and imitation as he watches family members adapt their routines to the changing season. The community around you is also responding to spring's arrival. The village streets, which were quiet and nearly empty during winter's worst weather, come alive with increased activity. People emerge from their houses to repair winter damage, trade goods and services, and renew the social connections that winter's isolation may have strained. The church calendar marks spring's progression with feast days and observances that structure community life. Palm Sunday reminds everyone of Christ's entry into Jerusalem. But it also marks the time when certain agricultural activities should begin. Easter celebrates resurrection and renewal, themes that resonate strongly with people whose survival depends on the annual cycle of death and rebirth that governs agricultural life. Master William uses these religious observances to structure his business planning. Certain types of orders are traditionally placed around specific holidays. The cloth needed for Easter finery must be completed weeks in advance. Summer festivals will require fabrics that are still months away from completion. The rhythm of religious observance and commercial activity interweave in ways that make each dependent on the other.
The increased daylight also brings opportunities for education and skill development that winter's short days don't allow.
Tom's carpentry lessons can extend longer into the evening. Mary can practice her embroidery with better light. Even you can spend time after the regular workday learning new weaving techniques or experimenting with different thread patterns. But spring also brings reminders of life's fragility in 1525. The improved weather makes travel possible. And with travelers come news of troubles in other regions. Wars that seemed distant during winter's isolation suddenly feel closer as refugees begin to appear and as merchants report disruptions to trade routes. Disease outbreaks that were contained by winter weather begin to spread as people move around more freely. Agnes hears from other women about families in nearby villages that didn't survive the winter. Elderly people who succumbed to cold and hunger. Children who fell victim to diseases that their malnourished bodies couldn't fight off. Adults who died from injuries or illnesses that might have been survivable under better circumstances. These reports serve as sobering reminders of how narrow the margin between survival and death really is. The economic pressures of spring are also significant. Food stores that seemed adequate in the dark days of December begin to look alarmingly small, as the family faces the months between the end of winter supplies and the beginning of the next harvest. Every meal requires careful calculation to ensure that the family doesn't run out of food before new crops become available. Master William faces similar pressures as he balances the costs of new materials against uncertain future income. The orders he's received look promising, but economic conditions can change rapidly, and merchants who seem reliable can disappear or default on their obligations. The investment in new wool and other materials represents a significant risk that could either lead to prosperity or financial disaster. The lengthening days also mean that more hours of each day are available for productive work, but this blessing comes with the burden of increased expectations. Families that might have relaxed slightly during winter's enforced idleness now face pressure to maximize their productivity during the months when conditions allow intensive labor. Your own workday now begins earlier and ends later, taking advantage of the available light to increase output and income. But this increased productivity comes at the cost of leisure time and family interaction. The careful balance between work and rest that characterized winter life gives way to a more intense focus on economic activity. Agnes faces similar pressures, as the demands of garden work, house maintenance, and increased social obligations stretch her time and energy. The community activities that were suspended during winter now resume, requiring her participation in everything from collective food preparation for religious festivals to cooperative work projects that benefit the entire village. But spring also brings pleasures that make the increased work worthwhile. Fresh vegetables from the garden taste incredible after months of preserved foods. The longer days provide more opportunities for social interaction and community celebration. The warming weather makes daily life more comfortable and reduces the constant struggle against cold that dominated the winter months. Children delight in the return of outdoor play and the opportunity to explore beyond the confines of their houses. Games that were impossible during winter can resume, and new games appropriate to spring weather begin. The simple pleasure of feeling warm sunlight on their faces after months of gray skies and cold air provides a joy that modern people, with their artificial environments, rarely experience. As spring progresses towards summer, the pace of change accelerates. Each week brings new developments in the garden, new challenges in the workshop, and new opportunities for community cooperation and celebration. The careful planning that characterized winter gives way to the intensive activity that summer demands. But even as you embrace spring's opportunities, you're already thinking ahead to summer's challenges and autumn's harvest. In 1525, Survival requires constant awareness of the seasonal cycle and careful preparation for each phase of the year. Spring is not just a time of renewal, it's a time of preparation for the even more demanding seasons that lie ahead. The relationship between your family and food in 1525 is more intimate and precarious than anything modern people experience. Every meal represents a complex calculation of available resources, seasonal availability, preservation techniques, and family needs that could determine whether your children survive to adulthood. Your family's food sources are diverse but unreliable. The small garden behind your house provides vegetables when conditions are favorable. But a late frost, too much rain, or too little rain can destroy weeks of work and months of planned meals. The few chickens your family keeps provide eggs most of the year, and occasional meat when a bird becomes too old to lay. But they also require feeding and care that competes with other demands on family resources. The grain that forms the foundation of your family's diet comes from multiple sources, each with its own risks and benefits. Some you grow yourself on a small plot outside the village, working the land in exchange for a share of the harvest. Other grain you purchase from farmers who have surplus to sell. But the price fluctuates wildly based on weather, demand, and the political stability that affects trade routes. Agnes manages the family's food stores with skills that would impress modern nutritionists. Though her knowledge comes from practical experience rather than scientific understanding, she knows how to make stored grain last through lean periods by careful rationing and creative preparation. She understands which preserved foods provide the nutrients needed for heavy physical labor and which are better suited for feeding children or elderly family members. The process of food preservation begins almost as soon as fresh food becomes available. Agnes spends long hours during the brief harvest season drying vegetables, salting meat, fermenting cabbage into sauerkraut, and preparing other foods in ways that will prevent spoilage during the months when fresh food isn't available. These preservation techniques are essential survival skills, but they're also time-consuming and require careful attention to prevent the food poisoning that could kill the entire family. Your family's diet would seem monotonous by modern standards, built around bread, porridge, and pottage that provide the calories needed for physical labor, but little variety in flavor or texture. Meat is rare, usually appearing only on special occasions, or when an animal dies and must be consumed quickly before it spoils. Fresh fruits and vegetables are seasonal luxuries that provide important nutrients but can't be counted on for year-round nutrition. But Agnes has developed remarkable skills in making this limited diet both nutritious and palatable. She knows which wild plants can supplement the family's nutrition during spring months when stored foods are running low. She understands how to combine grains and legumes to provide complete proteins. She's learned to use herbs and spices not just for flavor, but for their medicinal properties. The brewing of ale is one of Agnes's most important skills, though one that modern people might not recognize as food preparation. The weak ale that your family drinks with most meals isn't meant to provide intoxication. It's often safer than the available water and provides calories and nutrients that supplement the rest of the diet. The brewing process also requires careful timing and attention to prevent contamination that could make the entire batch dangerous to drink.
Water quality is a constant concern that affects every aspect of food preparation.
The well that serves your neighborhood sometimes produces water that's clear and clean, but other times it's cloudy or has an off taste that suggests contamination. Agnes has learned to evaluate water quality through sight, smell, and taste, and she knows various techniques for improving water that seems questionable. The seasonal rhythm of food availability shapes every aspect of family life.
Spring brings relief, as stored foods are supplemented by early vegetables and increased egg production.
But it also brings the challenge of making winter stores last until the new harvest. Summer provides abundance, but also the frantic work of preservation that will determine whether the family eats well during the following winter. Autumn is both celebration and anxiety as the harvest determines the family's prospects for the coming year. A good harvest means security, and perhaps even some luxury foods during the winter months. A poor harvest means hunger, vulnerability to disease, and difficult decisions about which family members get how much food during the lean months. Winter requires careful management of stored foods and constant attention to preventing spoilage, theft, or waste. Agnes checks the grain stores regularly for signs of insect damage or mold. She rotates foods to ensure that older items are used first.
She plans meals weeks in advance to ensure that the available food is distributed appropriately across the remaining weeks until spring.
The social aspects of food in 1525 are also complex and important. Sharing food with neighbors during times of abundance creates obligations that can be called upon during times of scarcity. The hospitality offered to travelers and guests reflects both Christian duty and practical calculation. Today's guest might be tomorrow's trading partner or source of assistance. Religious observances structure the year's eating patterns in ways that affect both nutrition and community solidarity. Fast days require abstaining from certain foods, which can be challenging when the restricted foods are among the few available options. Feast days allow for special foods and generous portions that provide both physical and psychological benefits after periods of restricted eating. The preparation of food for religious festivals and community celebrations requires cooperation among multiple families, pooling resources and labor to create meals that no single family could afford or prepare alone. These cooperative efforts strengthen community bonds, while also providing everyone with better food than they could manage individually. But food preparation is also dangerous work in 1525. Contaminated ingredients can cause illness or death. Improperly preserved foods can harbor organisms that cause food poisoning. Cooking over open fires creates risks of burns and house fires. The sharp tools used for food preparation can cause injuries that become infected in an era before antibiotics. Agnes has learned to manage these risks through careful observation and traditional techniques passed down through generations of women. She knows how to tell when meat is beginning to spoil before it becomes dangerous. She understands which parts of vegetables are safe to eat and which should be discarded. She's learned to recognize the signs of successful fermentation versus dangerous decomposition. The economic aspects of food management in 1525 require constant attention and difficult decisions. Should the family invest in a pig that will provide meat during the winter but requires feeding throughout the summer? Is it better to sell surplus vegetables now for immediate income or preserve them for the family's winter consumption? How much grain should be set aside for next year's planting versus consumed for this year's nutrition? These decisions are complicated by the unpredictability of weather, politics, and economics. A decision that seems wise in spring might prove disastrous by autumn if conditions change unexpectedly. The family must balance immediate needs against long-term security, individual preferences against family welfare, and certainty against risk in ways that require both practical knowledge and intuitive judgment. Agnes's role as the family's food manager gives her significant power and responsibility within the household. Her decisions about meal planning, food preservation, and resource allocation directly affect every family member's health, energy level, and chances of survival. This responsibility is both empowering and burdensome, requiring skills that combine scientific knowledge, artistic creativity, and business acumen. The children learn food management skills through observation and participation, but they also learn the anxiety that comes with food insecurity. They understand that waste is not just expensive but potentially life-threatening. They learn to appreciate foods that might seem unappetizing by modern standards because they understand how precious any food is when the alternative is hunger. Your own relationship with food as an adult male in 1525 involves both dependency and responsibility. You depend on Agnes's skills for the transformation of raw ingredients into nutritious meals. But you're also responsible for earning the money that buys ingredients and for contributing physical labor to food production when your work schedule allows. The weaving workshop where you work is itself connected to food production in ways that modern people might not recognize. The sheep that provide wool also provide milk and meat. The land used for grazing sheep could alternatively be used for growing food crops. The economic decisions about textile production versus food production affect the entire community's survival and prosperity. Master William, as a relatively prosperous member of the community, has food security that your family lacks. But he also has obligations to provide assistance to workers and community members during times of scarcity. His prosperity depends partly on the health and productivity of his workers, which means he has practical as well as moral reasons for ensuring that his employees have adequate nutrition. The larger political and economic forces that affect food availability in 1525 are often beyond local control, but constantly present in daily calculations. Wars can disrupt trade routes that bring grain from agricultural regions. Political instability can drive people from their land, creating refugees who strain local food resources. Economic changes in distant regions can affect the price of basic commodities in ways that make survival more or less difficult. Weather patterns that extend beyond the local area can create regional shortages or abundance that affect everyone. A harsh winter in the grain-growing regions can drive up prices throughout the area. Excellent growing conditions in multiple regions can create abundance that lowers prices and provides opportunities for families to improve their food security. As evening approaches and your family gathers for the day's main meal, the food on your wooden bowl represents far more than simple nutrition. It's the product of Agnes's skill, the family's economic success, the community's agricultural productivity, and the larger forces of weather, politics, and economics that shape life in 1525.
The bread you eat required grain that was grown, harvested, stored, ground,
and baked through processes that involved dozens of people and months of work. The vegetables in your pottage represent successful gardening, careful preservation, and the knowledge that previous generations developed about which plants grow well in your climate and soil. Even the simple meal that ends your day connects your family to the vast web of relationships and dependencies that make survival possible in an era when human life depends directly on natural cycles and community cooperation. Tomorrow will bring new challenges in managing food resources. But tonight, with your family fed and your hunger satisfied, you can rest with the satisfaction of another day's successful survival. The cold you've been fighting for the past week is getting worse rather than better. And in 1525, this progression from minor illness to serious concern happens with a speed and severity that would shock modern people accustomed to antibiotics and advanced medical care. What starts as a scratchy throat and runny nose can quickly develop into something that threatens your ability to work, your family's economic security, and potentially your life. Agnes has been treating your illness with the remedies available to her, herbal teas brewed from plants she gathered during the summer, steam inhalations over a bowl of hot water, and rest whenever your work schedule permits. Her knowledge of medicinal plants rivals that of many modern herbalists, accumulated through years of treating family illnesses and learned from her mother and other experienced women in the community. But her remedies, while sometimes effective, operate more through trial and error than scientific understanding. She knows that willow bark tea sometimes reduces fever, but she doesn't know that it contains compounds similar to modern aspirin. She understands that certain herbs seem to help with coughing, but she can't distinguish between viral and bacterial infections or predict which treatments will work for which conditions. The progression of your illness follows patterns that people in 1525 know well but can't effectively prevent or treat. The cold that seemed minor 3 days ago has settled into your chest, causing a deep cough that brings up phlegm streaked with blood. Your fever comes and goes unpredictably, leaving you alternately shivering with chills and sweating from internal heat. Most concerning is the effect of illness on your ability to work. Missing even a few days at the weaving shop means lost income that the family can't afford. But working while seriously ill risks making the condition worse and potentially spreading it to other workers. Master William faces his own difficult calculations about whether to send sick workers home to prevent contagion or keep them working to maintain production schedules. The medical understanding available in 1525 combines practical observation with theories that seem bizarre by modern standards. Agnes believes that your illness results partly from an imbalance of bodily humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, that must be restored to proper proportions for health to return. This theory influences her treatment choices, leading her to recommend foods and activities that are supposed to warm or cool your body depending on which humor seems excessive. Father Michael, who serves as both spiritual advisor and one of the village's most educated medical practitioners, offers treatments that combine herbal remedies with religious observances. He provides blessed oils that are supposed to have healing properties, recommends specific prayers for recovery from illness, and suggests pilgrimages to holy sites known for miraculous cures. But Father Michael also possesses practical medical knowledge that's often effective despite being based on incomplete understanding of disease mechanisms. He knows how to set broken bones, clean and dress wounds, and recognize the signs of illnesses that are likely to be fatal. His combination of spiritual authority and practical skill makes him the person most families turn to when serious illness strikes. The village also has Old Martha, a woman whose reputation as a healer extends throughout the region. Her knowledge comes from decades of experience treating everything from difficult births to mysterious wasting diseases. Some people whisper that her success comes from supernatural sources, but others recognize that she simply possesses more extensive knowledge of medicinal plants and healing techniques than anyone else in the area. Martha's treatments often seem strange or even frightening to modern sensibilities. She might recommend bleeding to release excess humors, applying leeches to reduce inflammation, or consuming preparations made from ingredients like ground beetles or powdered bones. But she also knows which plants can effectively reduce pain, which techniques can help with difficult births, and which symptoms indicate conditions that are beyond her ability to treat. Your illness has progressed to the point where Agnes decides to consult Martha. Despite the cost of her services and the family's general preference for handling medical problems independently, Martha examines you by looking at your eyes, feeling your pulse, examining your urine, and asking detailed questions about the progression of your symptoms. Her diagnosis is both reassuring and concerning. She believes your illness is a common winter fever that usually resolves without permanent damage, but she's also concerned about the blood in your cough and the persistence of your fever. Her recommended treatment involves a combination of herbal preparations, dietary changes, and activities designed to help your body restore its natural balance. The herbal preparations she provides are complex mixtures of plants chosen for their supposed effects on specific bodily humors. Some taste terrible but seem to ease your coughing. Others provide a warming sensation that helps with the chills that accompany your fever. The dietary recommendations require Agnes to modify your meals in ways that stretch the family's food resources but might contribute to your recovery. But Martha also warns that recovery isn't guaranteed and provides Agnes with signs to watch for that would indicate the illness is becoming life-threatening. These warning signs include changes in breathing, certain types of skin discoloration, and alterations in consciousness that could indicate the illness is affecting your brain or other vital organs. The possibility of death from what seems like a minor illness is a constant reality in 1525 that affects every aspect of daily life. Agnes begins making subtle preparations for the possibility that you might not recover, ensuring that she knows how to handle necessary business affairs, thinking about how the family would manage economically without your income, and considering which community members might provide assistance if you become unable to work. These preparations aren't morbid or pessimistic. They're practical responses to statistical realities that everyone in 1525 understands. People die from infections that modern medicine could cure easily, young. Healthy adults can become seriously ill and die within days from diseases that today would require only rest and supportive care. The broader health environment of 1525 makes recovery from any illness more difficult than it would be under modern conditions. The constant presence of parasites weakens everyone's immune system. Poor nutrition makes it harder for bodies to fight off infections. The cold, damp living conditions provide ideal environments for respiratory illnesses to persist and spread. Dental problems that would be minor inconveniences today become serious health threats in an era without effective dental care. Your toothache, which has been bothering you for weeks, represents not just discomfort but potential danger if the infection spreads to other parts of your head or body. Agnes treats the pain with clove oil and other traditional remedies, but she can't address the underlying decay that continues to worsen. The cumulative effect of multiple minor health problems creates a burden that would be unusual in modern times. Your chronic toothache, the intestinal parasites that occasionally cause digestive problems, the persistent cough from your current illness, and the joint pain that results from years of physical labor combine to create a level of daily discomfort that affects your work performance, your mood, and your interactions with family and community members. But people in 1525 have also developed remarkable tolerance for discomfort and remarkable skill at functioning despite health problems that would disable many modern people. You continue working even when you feel terrible because the alternative is economic disaster for your family. Agnes manages complex household tasks while dealing with her own health problems, including chronic back pain from heavy lifting and persistent headaches that might indicate high blood pressure or other serious conditions. The children's health receives careful attention because childhood illnesses can be fatal so easily. But the medical interventions available for children are limited and sometimes dangerous. When little John developed a high fever last winter, Agnes treated him with cooling baths and herbal preparations. But she also knew that similar fevers had killed other children in the village despite receiving identical treatment. Mary's recent cough has everyone concerned because respiratory illnesses can progress rapidly in children. And the difference between a minor cold and the beginning of lung fever isn't always clear until the illness has advanced significantly. Agnes watches her daughter carefully for signs that the cough is worsening and prepares treatments that might help if the condition becomes more serious. Tom's robust health is both a blessing and a source of concern, because healthy children are often given more dangerous tasks and greater responsibilities that increase their risk of accidents and injuries. His work with sharp tools while learning carpentry skills, his responsibilities for managing the family's animals, and his participation in community activities that involve physical challenges all create opportunities for injuries that could become infected or cause permanent disability. The community's approach to healthcare combines individual family responsibility with collective support and knowledge sharing. Women share information about which treatments work for which conditions, pooling their knowledge to improve everyone's medical outcomes. Men provide physical assistance to families dealing with serious illnesses, helping with heavy work that sick people can't manage. Religious observances related to health include both specific prayers for healing and broader spiritual practices that are believed to promote general wellness. The church calendar includes feast days dedicated to saints who are associated with particular types of healing. And people often time medical treatments to coincide with these observances. But religious and medical approaches to health sometimes conflict in ways that create difficult decisions for families. Church teachings suggest that illness might be divine punishment for sin, which can create guilt and self-blame that interfere with practical treatment efforts. Some religious authorities view certain healing practices as potentially sinful if they seem to rely on supernatural forces that aren't clearly Christian. The economic impact of illness extends far beyond the cost of treatments. Lost work time reduces family income at the same time that medical expenses increase family costs. Serious illness can force families to sell possessions, borrow money at high interest rates, or call in favors from community members in ways that affect their long-term economic stability. Master William faces his own health-related business challenges as he tries to balance his workers' health needs against the demands of maintaining production schedules and meeting customer commitments. Workers who are too sick to produce quality cloth hurt the business, but workers who spread illness to others can shut down the entire operation for weeks. The workshop environment itself creates health risks that everyone accepts as unavoidable aspects of the trade. The constant handling of wool exposes workers to dust and debris that can cause respiratory problems. The dyes used to color thread contain chemicals that can cause skin irritation and other health problems. The repetitive motions required for weaving create joint and muscle problems that worsen with age. Mental health in 1525 is understood very differently than modern concepts of psychology and psychiatry, but the community recognizes that some people suffer from persistent sadness, excessive fears, or behavioral problems that affect their ability to function normally. These conditions are often attributed to spiritual causes rather than medical ones, leading to treatments that combine prayer, religious counseling, and sometimes herbal preparations thought to affect mood and behavior. The stress of constant economic insecurity, the grief that comes from frequent deaths of family and community members, and the physical exhaustion that results from unending labor create mental health challenges that affect almost everyone. But the community also provides support systems that help people cope with these stresses through shared religious observances, cooperative work arrangements, and social networks that provide both practical assistance and emotional support. Life expectancy in 1525 is dramatically shorter than modern standards, but the people who survive childhood often live longer than statistical averages might suggest. Adults who reach age 30 have a reasonable chance of living into their 50s or 60s if they avoid major accidents, serious diseases, and the various forms of violence that can end lives suddenly. Agnes, at 25, is already considered middle-aged because so many women die in childbirth or from complications related to pregnancy and childbearing. But if she survives her remaining childbearing years and avoids serious illness, she could live to become one of the elderly women whose knowledge and experience make them valuable community resources. Your own life expectancy is affected by your occupation, your economic status, your access to good food and shelter, and simply the random factors that determine whether you encounter fatal diseases or accidents. As a skilled craftsman with steady employment, you have better prospects than laborers or farmers. But you're also exposed to workplace hazards and economic uncertainties that could change your circumstances rapidly. The children's prospects depend partly on their health during the crucial early years, when so many children die from diseases that their developing immune systems can't fight. But they also depend on the family's ability to provide adequate nutrition, shelter, and education that will give them the skills they need to survive as adults. As your current illness slowly begins to improve thanks to Martha's treatments, Agnes's care, and perhaps simple good fortune, you're reminded of how precious health is when it can't be taken for granted. The gradual return of energy, the easing of pain, and the restoration of your ability to work effectively feel like genuine miracles rather than expected outcomes. The experience of illness also strengthens family bonds and community connections in ways that modern people might not anticipate. Agnes's careful nursing demonstrates her commitment to the family's welfare in ways that everyday interactions might not reveal. The concern shown by neighbors and fellow workers reinforces the social networks that everyone depends on for survival. Master William's decision to hold your position open while you recovered, despite the economic cost to his business, reflects both Christian charity and practical calculation about the value of experienced workers. The knowledge that your job will be available when you're ready to return provides security that makes recovery both more likely and more meaningful. As you prepare to return to work after more than a week of illness, you're both grateful for your recovery and aware of how easily the outcome could have been different. The line between health and serious illness, between recovery and permanent disability, between survival and death is much thinner in 1525 than modern people realize. But this awareness of mortality also creates an appreciation for daily pleasures and achievements that people with more secure lives might not experience. The simple ability to work without pain, to eat without nausea, to sleep without coughing feels like extraordinary good fortune rather than normal conditions. Tomorrow you'll return to the weaving shop, and life will resume its normal rhythms of work, family responsibility and community participation, but the recent illness has reminded you of how precious and fragile those normal rhythms really are, and how much depends on the complex combination of personal care, community support, and simple luck that keeps families alive and functioning in an era when survival is never guaranteed. The news reaches your family on a cold morning in late winter when Agnes returns from the market with tears in her eyes and a heaviness in her voice that immediately tells you something terrible has happened. Old Henrik, the carpenter who has been teaching Tom woodworking skills, died during the night after a brief illness that seemed minor just days ago. Henrik's death sends ripples through the entire village because he wasn't just a skilled craftsman. He was a repository of knowledge, a mentor to young men learning the trade, and a central figure in the complex web of relationships that holds the community together. His passing represents not just the loss of a person, but the potential loss of crucial skills and the disruption of economic and social networks that many families depend on. The immediate response to Henrik's death follows patterns that everyone in 1525 understands, but that would seem alien to modern people. His body must be prepared for burial quickly because preservation techniques are limited, and delay could create health hazards for the entire community. His widow, Martha, must make rapid decisions about business affairs that Henrik managed, family finances that are suddenly uncertain, and social obligations that can't be delayed even in the midst of grief. Agnes joins the group of women who take responsibility for preparing Henrik's body for burial, a task that requires both practical skills and emotional strength. The body must be washed, dressed in Henrik's best clothing, and arranged in ways that show respect for the deceased while also protecting the health of the living. This work is considered both an honor and an obligation, demonstrating the community's care for its members even after death. The preparation of Henrik's body takes place in his own house, where neighbors and family members gather to pay their respects, share memories, and provide practical support to his widow. This gathering serves multiple functions. It honors the deceased, provides emotional support to the grieving family, and allows the community to begin adjusting to the changes that Henrik's death will necessitate. Your family's participation in these activities is both voluntary and obligatory. The assistance you provide to Henrik's family today creates social obligations that they'll be expected to honor when your family faces similar crises. But the support also reflects genuine affection and respect for a man who contributed significantly to the community's welfare and who shared his knowledge generously with younger workers. Tom is particularly affected by Henrik's death because he's lost not just a teacher, but a potential path to economic security as an adult. Henrik had been considering taking Tom as a formal apprentice, an arrangement that would have provided structured training in carpentry skills and eventual access to the Carpenters Guild. Without Henrik's mentorship, Tom's future becomes more uncertain. The economic implications of Henrik's death extend throughout the village. His workshop contained tools, materials, and partially completed projects that represent significant value. But his widow lacks the skills to continue the business independently. The customers who had commissioned work from Henrik must find alternative craftsmen, creating both opportunities and pressures for other carpenters in the region. Master William sees Henrik's death as both a loss and a potential opportunity. Henrik was the primary supplier of wooden parts for the looms and other equipment that the weaving business requires. His death could mean delays in equipment maintenance and higher costs for purchasing wooden components from more distant suppliers. But it might also create opportunities for establishing new business relationships that could benefit the weaving workshop. The funeral arrangements reflect both religious requirements and practical considerations about community resources. Henrik's body will be buried in the churchyard, but the burial plot must be purchased from the church, and the grave must be dug by volunteers or hired workers. The funeral service will include both religious observances and community gathering that require coordination among multiple families. Father Michael plays a central role in organizing the funeral, not just as the person who will conduct the religious service, but as one of the few literate people who can handle the paperwork that death requires. He must record Henrik's death in church records, help his widow understand her legal rights regarding property and business affairs, and coordinate with civil authorities about issues like inheritance and taxation. The cost of Henrik's funeral creates financial strain for his widow at the same time that her income from the carpentry business ends. The community response includes both direct financial assistance and practical support, like providing food for the funeral meal, helping with household tasks that Martha can't manage alone, and offering advice about business decisions she must make quickly. Agnes contributes to this community support by helping prepare food for the funeral gathering and by offering to assist Martha with household tasks during the difficult period of adjustment. These contributions require time and resources that your family can't easily spare, but they're essential investments in the social relationships that provide security for everyone. The funeral gathering itself serves multiple purposes beyond honoring Henrik's memory. It provides an opportunity for the community to come together and reaffirm social bonds that Henrik's death has strained. It allows people to share memories and stories that preserve Henrik's contributions to community life. And it creates a forum for beginning to address the practical problems that his death has created. During the funeral meal, conversations naturally turn to questions about who will take over Henrik's role in various community projects, how his tools and workshop space will be used, and how his widow will manage financially. These discussions aren't disrespectful to Henrik's memory. They're essential planning for community survival and adaptation. Tom listens carefully to these conversations because they directly affect his future prospects. Several men mention their willingness to provide some carpentry instruction, but none offers the comprehensive training that Henrik had been prepared to provide. The possibility of traveling to a larger town to seek apprenticeship opportunities is discussed, but such arrangements would be expensive and would separate Tom from his family during crucial years. The religious aspects of Henrik's death provide both comfort and additional stress for the community. Father Michael's sermon about eternal life and divine judgment offers hope that Henrik's suffering has ended and that faithful Christians can expect reunion with deceased family members in heaven. But the emphasis on judgment also creates anxiety about whether Henrik, and everyone else, has lived sufficiently virtuous lives to merit salvation. The week following Henrik's funeral brings a series of adjustments that affect every family in the village. His widow decides to sell some of his tools to raise money for immediate expenses, creating opportunities for men who couldn't previously afford high-quality carpentry equipment. But the sale also represents the permanent loss of resources that had benefited the entire community. Master William purchases several of Henrik's woodworking tools, both because he needs them for maintaining workshop equipment and because he recognizes their value as investments. But he also feels obligated to offer Martha a fair price, rather than taking advantage of her financial desperation, balancing business considerations against community obligations. The redistribution of Henrik's responsibilities requires complex negotiations among several families. His role in maintaining the church building passes to another carpenter whose skills are adequate, but not equal to Henrik's expertise. His participation in various community projects must be replaced by combinations of people whose collective efforts might approximate his individual contributions. Agnes becomes more involved in providing support to Henrik's widow, as it becomes clear that Martha's adjustment to widowhood will be longer and more difficult than initially expected. Martha's health, which was never robust, deteriorates under the stress of grief and economic uncertainty. Her ability to manage household tasks independently proves more limited than she had believed. This increased involvement in Martha's care requires Agnes to reorganize her own household routines and to call upon favors from other community members to help manage tasks she can't complete herself. The web of mutual obligations that Henrik's death has created extends throughout the village, affecting families who had only indirect connections to the deceased carpenter. Your own grief for Henrik is complicated by practical concerns about how his death affects your family's prospects. His loss eliminates one source of supplementary income that had occasionally been available when carpentry projects required additional workers. It also removes a potential mentor for Tom and a source of advice about woodworking projects that could improve your family's living conditions. But Henrik's death also provides lessons about mortality and community responsibility that are essential parts of education in 1525. Tom learns about the importance of acquiring skills quickly while teachers are available. Mary observes how women support each other during times of crisis. Little John absorbs lessons about death and community response that will shape his understanding of social obligations as he grows older. The seasonal timing of Henrik's death, coming during winter's final weeks, adds additional challenges to the community's response. The ground is still partially frozen, making grave digging difficult and expensive. Food resources are at their lowest point of the year, making it harder for families to contribute to the funeral meal and ongoing support for Henrik's widow. But the timing also means that Henrik's death doesn't disrupt agricultural work or other seasonal activities that require community cooperation. The carpenter's skills are less essential during winter months when construction projects are suspended and tool maintenance is less urgent. The community has time to develop longer-term solutions to the problems that Henrik's death has created. As weeks pass and the immediate crisis of Henrik's death gives way to longer-term adjustments, the community begins to develop new patterns of cooperation and resource sharing that compensate for his loss. Tom begins learning carpentry skills from multiple teachers rather than relying on a single mentor. Martha establishes new routines that allow her to maintain her household with less independence but greater community support. The experience of dealing with Henrik's death also strengthens community bonds in ways that might not have been possible under other circumstances. Families that had limited previous contact develop working relationships through their shared response to the crisis. Young people gain practical experience in managing community affairs. The social networks that everyone depends on for survival become more resilient through testing and adaptation. Master William's business eventually benefits from the changes that Henrik's death necessitated, as new suppliers provide wooden components at lower costs and with better delivery schedules. But he also recognizes that the community's overall capacity for self-sufficiency has been reduced, making everyone more dependent on outside suppliers and more vulnerable to economic disruptions. Agnes's increased involvement in community care activities enhances her reputation as someone who can be counted on during difficult times, creating social capital that benefits your entire family. But the additional responsibilities also strain her time and energy, requiring adjustments in household routines that affect everyone. As spring arrives and life begins to return to more normal rhythms, Henrik's death has become part of the community's shared history rather than an immediate crisis. But the lessons of mortality, mutual dependence, and social responsibility that his death provided continue to influence daily decisions and long-term planning. The grave in the churchyard where Henrik is buried serves as a daily reminder of life's fragility and the importance of community bonds. Children playing near the cemetery learn to associate death with memory, respect, and the continuation of life through community survival rather than individual immortality. Tonight, as your family gathers for the evening meal, Henrik's absence is still felt in small ways. Tom mentions a woodworking question that Henrik could have answered. Agnes wonders how Martha is managing her evening routines alone. And you reflect on the skilled work that Henrik completed during his lifetime and that will outlast his mortal existence. The experience of Henrik's death has reminded everyone that survival in 1525 depends not just on individual effort, but on community resilience, mutual support, and the ability to adapt quickly to changes that can't be predicted or prevented. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but the community's response to Henrik's death has strengthened the social bonds that make survival possible for everyone. As winter gradually releases its grip and the first tentative signs of spring begin to appear, your family and community start the eternal process of looking forward, planning for the challenges and opportunities that the coming seasons will bring. This forward-looking perspective is essential for survival in 1525, where success depends on anticipating needs, preparing for likely problems, and making decisions months in advance of their consequences. Agnes has been planning the family garden since the depths of winter, considering which crops grew well last year and which failed, thinking about changes in soil conditions and available space, and calculating how much seed to save, purchase, or trade to achieve the best possible harvest. Her decisions about what to plant will determine much of what the family eats during the next winter, making this planning both exciting and anxiety-provoking. The seeds she saved from last year's harvest represent both genetic continuity and adaptation to local conditions. Plants that thrived in your family's specific garden plot, with its particular soil conditions and drainage patterns, are more likely to succeed than seeds from distant sources. But saved seeds also carry the risk of genetic problems or diseases that could destroy entire crops. Tom's education continues to evolve as new opportunities arise to replace the mentorship he lost when Henrik died. Master William has arranged for him to spend time with the village blacksmith, learning metalworking skills that complement his woodworking knowledge. The combination of these skills could make him valuable in multiple trades, providing economic security that specialization in a single craft might not offer. But Tom's expanded education also requires investments of time and money that strain the family's resources. Apprenticeship arrangements often require fees, and the time Tom spends learning pays no immediate income while still requiring the family to feed and clothe him. The investment in his future must be balanced against the family's immediate survival needs. Mary's education focuses on the complex skills that women need for household management. But Agnes also recognizes that economic uncertainties might require her daughter to earn income through skilled work. Mary's embroidery and textile skills could provide important supplementary income for her future family, especially if political or economic changes disrupt traditional economic arrangements. Little John's development continues through observation and imitation, but Agnes has begun thinking about formal education opportunities that might be available when he's older. The village school that Father Michael operates provides basic literacy training for boys whose families can afford the fees and can spare their labor during school hours. Master William's business planning for the coming year involves complex calculations about market demand, material costs, and competition from other textile producers. The political situation in the region appears stable, which should mean continued demand for cloth and relatively predictable transportation costs. But political stability can change rapidly, and Master William must balance optimistic projections against the possibility of disruptions that could devastate his business. The workshop's equipment will require major maintenance and possibly replacement during the coming year. The looms that provide the foundation for the business are showing wear from constant use, and some components will need to be replaced or rebuilt. Henrik's death has complicated these maintenance needs because his woodworking skills had been essential for keeping the equipment in good repair. Your own economic prospects for the coming year depend partly on your continued health and ability to work, partly on Master William's business success, and partly on broader economic conditions that affect demand for skilled textile workers. The illness you recently recovered from serves as a reminder that your ability to earn income is fragile and that the family needs to develop alternative sources of economic security. The community's agricultural prospects appear promising based on current weather patterns and soil conditions, but everyone understands that weather can change rapidly and that a late frost, Excessive rain or drought could create food shortages that affect everyone. Community leaders are already discussing contingency plans for mutual support if crop failures occur.
Religious observances during the coming year will provide structure for community activities while also requiring resources that families must plan for in advance.
Easter celebrations will require special foods and clothing that families are already beginning to prepare. Summer festivals will need community cooperation and shared expenses that require coordination among multiple families. The church building itself needs repairs that will require community labor and financial contributions from all families. Father Michael has been organizing work schedules and fundraising activities that will extend throughout the spring and summer months. These church maintenance projects provide opportunities for community cooperation, while also placing demands on everyone's time and resources. Political developments in the broader region could affect the village in ways that are difficult to predict, but impossible to ignore. News from traveling merchants suggests that taxation policies may change, potentially affecting the cost of basic commodities and the profitability of various trades. Changes in trade regulations could create new opportunities for some businesses while destroying others.
The possibility of military conflicts in neighboring regions creates both threats and opportunities for the village.
Warfare could disrupt trade routes and create refugee populations that strain local resources. But military demands for cloth, food, and other supplies could also create profitable opportunities for businesses that can meet army requirements. Agnes's planning for the family's health during the coming year includes preparing medicinal plants, maintaining relationships with Martha and other healers, and thinking about prevention strategies that might reduce the family's vulnerability to common illnesses. Her recent experience caring for your illness has reinforced her understanding of how quickly health situations can change and how important preparation can be. The family's clothing needs for the coming year require careful planning because cloth and clothing represent major investments that must last for extended periods. Growing children need larger garments, working adults need replacement of items that wear out from constant use, and seasonal changes require different types of clothing that must be prepared in advance. Housing maintenance and improvements must be planned around the family's financial resources and the availability of materials and labor. The roof needs attention before the next heavy rain season, and some of the walls need repairs that require skills the family doesn't possess independently. These maintenance needs must be balanced against other priorities and coordinated with neighbors who might provide assistance. Tom's future prospects require long-term planning that extends beyond the immediate family's resources and capabilities. Decisions about his continued education, potential apprenticeship arrangements, and eventual economic specialization will affect not just his own future, but the family's long-term economic security. Parents in 1525 understand that their children's success provides their own retirement security. Mary's future involves different types of planning, including consideration of marriage prospects, dowry preparations, and the skills she'll need to manage her own household successfully. Agnes's decisions about Mary's education and training will determine her daughter's options when she reaches marriageable age, and her ability to contribute to her future family's prosperity. The community's long-term prospects depend on its ability to maintain essential skills, preserve crucial knowledge, and adapt to changing circumstances while preserving the social cooperation that makes survival possible. Henrik's death has demonstrated how quickly communities can lose essential capabilities and how important it is to ensure that knowledge is transmitted to younger generations. Master William's role in the community's economic future involves not just his own business success but his responsibilities as an employer and community leader. His decisions about hiring, wages, and business expansion affect multiple families and influence the village's overall economic stability. The village's relationship with the broader regional economy requires careful management to take advantage of opportunities while minimizing exposure to risks. Too much dependence on outside markets creates vulnerability to external economic changes. But too much isolation limits opportunities for growth and improvement. Environmental factors that affect the community's long-term prospects include soil quality, water supply reliability, and climate patterns that could change over time. Decisions about land use, agricultural practices, and resource conservation will determine the village's ability to support its population sustainably. As evening settles over the village and families gather for their evening meals and activities, the conversations naturally turn to these plans and prospects for the future. Children absorb lessons about planning, preparation, and the importance of thinking beyond immediate needs. Adults share information and coordinate their planning to maximize everyone's chances of success. The sense of hope and continuity that characterizes these forward-looking discussions reflects the resilience and adaptability that allow communities to survive and sometimes thrive despite the constant challenges of life in 1525. People who face genuine threats to their survival on a regular basis develop remarkable skill at finding reasons for optimism and motivation for continued effort. Tonight, as your family settles into sleep after another day of work, community involvement and planning for the future, you reflect on the complex web of relationships, responsibilities, and opportunities that shape life in your time. The challenges are real and sometimes overwhelming. But so are the satisfactions that come from successful cooperation, skilled work, and the gradual improvements that persistent effort can achieve. Tomorrow will bring new work, new challenges, and new opportunities to contribute to the complex enterprise of survival and community building that defines life 500 years ago. The future remains uncertain in ways that modern people with their insurance policies and government safety nets rarely experience. But it also holds possibilities for achievement, prosperity, and happiness that make the effort worthwhile. As consciousness fades into sleep, your last thoughts focus on the gradual lengthening of days that promises spring's return, the plans that your family has made for the coming growing season, and the hope that next winter will find all of you healthier, more prosperous, and more secure than you are today. Life in 1525 requires extraordinary resilience, but it also provides extraordinary satisfaction when challenges are met successfully and communities work together effectively. The rhythm of your breathing slows to match the natural pace of rest that follows productive days and prepares for tomorrow's renewed efforts. In the darkness and quiet, surrounded by family and community, protected by walls that represent human ingenuity and cooperation, you rest with the satisfaction of another day's successful survival and the confidence that tomorrow will bring new opportunities to continue the ancient human enterprise of building meaningful life despite uncertainty and challenge. Your dreams, when they come, blend the concerns and hopes of daily life with deeper patterns that connect your experience to the universal human story of adaptation, cooperation, and persistence in the face of difficulty. The specific challenges of 1525 give way to the timeless themes of family love, community cooperation, and the eternal human hope that tomorrow will be better than today. The firelight dims to glowing coals, the house settles into nighttime quiet, and another day in the life of an ordinary family 500 years ago comes to its peaceful close, carrying forward the complex legacy of human survival, adaptation, and hope that connects all generations across the centuries that separate your world from ours.